Yo, 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 and welcome to the Crowbar PC Gaming Podcast. I'm Arch Davis. This is recorded on the 13th of January, a date of almost no global significance, so this intro has no jokes in it whatsoever. I'm also joined by Tom Senior.
Hello.
And Graham Smith.
Hello. I also have no jokes in me whatsoever.
Well, January there's no news even. There's no news.
No
Nothing's
joy
happened in January.
Nothing.
We were looking up things that we could tie in to an intro. Yeah, and the best we could come up with was a series of human tragedies of less than global significance. Sorry, people who died on that airliner in 1963 or whatever it was. And it is the feast day of Saint Mungo.
Huh.
Who is your patron saint, your very own patron saint,
your dad,
as a Glaswegian.
That's how it works, isn't it?
Is he Glaswegian?
Yeah.
Why there's St Mungo's in Bath, though, isn't it? A Bath-based charity?
No. Oh, maybe, but he's a Glaswegian saint. His Wikipedia page is all about Glasgow and turning off and on fires and saving robins.
He resurrected a robin. Apparently that was his saintly contribution to the canon of...
Yeah, then a fire went out and he reignited it by putting a piece of wood on it.
Hats,
Wait. That last one's not impressive.
Maybe the robin was fainted.
How out was that fire? I'm suggesting that maybe perhaps there were some embers underneath it.
No,
stoked it.
It was the power of God that reignited that fire.
It's an apocryphal accusation.
So no news. But what have you been playing, Graham?
I've been playing a roguelike, very briefly, called Depths of Tullagal.
What was that? Did you sneeze there?
Tullagal.
T-O-L?
A-G-A-L, Tullagal, I think, which is an awful, forgettable name, especially for a roguelike. It sounds like every other fucking fantasy roguelike ever made. And it's the sequel to a free browser game, which is also great, called Return to Tullagal, which sounds like it should be the sequel, but it's not. It's the prequel, and it's free, and you play it in your browser. But what's really cool about this roguelike is that it gets rid of a whole bunch of the inventory gubbins that you normally have to do with rogue games, and focuses instead on really tight combat mechanics to do with what's in your primary hand and your offhand. Because instead of it just being when you come to do combat with a monster and you just push into them in order to do whatever you've set as your primary attack, when you get close to another enemy, you enter a kind of combat mode in which you have action points. And you spend those action points to then strike the enemy before they hit back at you. Or prepare your shield, for example, if you've got a shield in your offhand to defend yourself against your enemy's next attacks. And what it does is, through that, it creates a really nice rhythm to the combat, like almost immediately, because, for example, you start off with a ring of regeneration that recharges every time you hit a monster. So you get into this kind of pattern of hit twice and then spend your third action point to restore any health now that you've charged up your ring. And then you find say a bow and arrow that you can carry in your offhand in order to do ranged attacks before someone gets close enough, or you find a shield and you work that into your pattern of hit, heal, then raise your shield, then take the attacks, then repeat. And it has that sort of feeling almost similar to Hoplite.
Oh, cool.
In that it's just these very tight combat mechanics that you can then very quickly start to look at the scenarios that you're in and working out, well, I'm going to attack that orc first, and then that troll, and then that spider guy, and I'm going to... You get this kind of rhythm, this bouncy rhythm to the combat, which you don't often get in roguelikes. Like, what I normally like about them is the diversity in the enemies, say, or the fun of finding unidentified scrolls and potions and not knowing what they're going to do, and then having these crazy effects and getting these really fun anecdotes out of it. Well, this feels much more strategic. And it's really tight and it's really simple and it's really easy to play. That's the other thing, because it does the same thing as Brogue, which is another free roguelike that I love. You can play it entirely with the mouse, so you don't have to learn. It's got a nice tile set and stuff like that, but you can just right-click on any enemy and you immediately get a sheet that tells you about what they do and how they act and what damage they do. You can right-click on any weapon that's on the floor. You're left-clicking on the skill bar or whatever to perform your actions. You're left-clicking to move. And so there's some helpful tips that pop up at the start, which will take you 30 seconds to read, and then you can just get on with the business of playing it, and then kind of trying to master that combat system. There's a lot of roguelikes around now, and there's quite a few traditional ones that have popped up on Steam over the last 6 months or so.
Is this a traditional one with ASCII tiles and
No,
stuff?
it's got proper nice art style. When I say traditional, I mean not like Dungeons of Dreadmore or Splunky or anything like that. But there's not many that are just kind of this smart and this easy to play right from the buff. Pretty cool.
Legends of
Depths of Talagal.
Talagal.
But Talagal sounds enough like, is it Caragor?
Caragor was the dog thing from Mordor.
Which the orcs
You don't want to go deep in one of those.
The orcs kept pronouncing in a really...
Caragor!
Talagal!
Brigador!
Whenever I hear a fancy name, it just gets replaced in my brain with arbitrary place. So it's depths of arbitrary place is what I hear. And like the worst ones are like fancy name or fancy thing of fantasy place. So it's like arbitrary thing of arbitrary place. And I don't know how to care about that. I just don't have facilities.
That happens to me a lot when I'm reading books and unfamiliar words, whether they're in just a different language or just a word I haven't come across. I don't necessarily remember them phonetically even. I just remember them as a set of symbols that then go wordlessly into my brain. And so I'm quite happy to carry on reading the book, and I'll keep track of the characters with this glyph instead of a name. But by the end of it, it's, you'll hear somebody else discussing it, and I'll say this character's name. I'm like, who the fuck is that?
That's exactly it. It's I think it's just probably informed by the language you speak growing up at a very early age. Like, but before you're, there are certain sounds that you just can't learn past a certain point in your development. So the reason why, trying to speak Chinese as someone who's been growing up in the West is that there are just vowel sounds and inflections that you don't understand how to possibly make and never will. It's just locked off. And that's what it feels like when someone goes depths of blah, blah, blah. I feel like that's just locked off to me. I don't know what the fuck that is.
I don't want to learn anymore.
I just feel like kind of empty sadness. Like, it's like Kingdoms of Amalur, the Reckoning. It's just like, blah.
What should they have called it? What would you have called this game?
Depths of Talagal.
Yeah. Strategy rogue.
God. Well, this is the problem, is that naming things is actually super fucking hard, especially if you want it to be something that people can Google for, which isn't already used for another game name or lots of other...
I'm talking to a mutual friend of ours who's currently trying to think of a game name. He's been kind of putting out these lots of ideas and getting feedback from certain developers who say should be as literal as possible. Never be anything less than literal, because it literally commutes to, many, many more sales if you have a name that is just completely explicit. You got robots, they're searching a planet, call it Robot Explorers. That's cool.
So few game developers do that, though. They always have these fucking enigmatic names. Like, even if it's not a fantasy game, it's always...
Well, I don't necessarily know that's
woolly.
Always the right advice, I was going to say. I think you can strike a balance between being somewhat impressionistic to the feel of the game at the same time as describing perhaps what happens in it. I think maybe Robot Explorers is a little too dry and a bit too kind of similar to other games with robots in them, maybe. Lots of games with robots in the title.
They're really brilliantly named games, because this comes up quite a lot on our podcast. Well, we just complain all the time.
Gratuitous Space Battles is probably pretty good, because that actually... I don't think I'm betraying any trust by saying that was Klifsky, who makes Gratuitous Space Battles. His recommendation was to be as literal as possible, but I think even he, gratuitous isn't a word that you necessarily pick. It's quite a descriptive and esoteric word, really.
You want something that's
accurate,
still,
but it's also...
It can't be dry, that's the thing. Like, if it has to be literal, but I think has to also be fun or evocative in some way. And I think Cliff has given talks about naming games before, and he's got a theory that games with 3 words in their title work really well.
Really?
Yeah. Just like Gratuitous Space Battles, there's a nice kind of bouncy rhythm to it.
I suppose you're less likely to bounce into a trademark if you use 3 words. The more words you combine together, the more kind of exclusive you own the use of those 3 words, right? Maybe? I don't know.
I like Civilization. just one word and
democracy also.
Yeah, it's just big grandiose concepts that
Football Manager.
Yeah. What do you do in that game?
Yeah. Oh well.
That game sounds cool.
Hitting Swords Dungeon. That's what you've been playing.
I think, I don't know if it unlocks classes as you go along, but your starting character is a butcher, and your apprentice has been, you sent him to town to buy you some game.
Rogue Butcher.
And
come on. Come on.
And the town was attacked, I guess, and your apprentice was dragged off into this dungeon, and you're a maniac with a butcher's knife who's going off into this dungeon to find him, I suppose.
Rogue Butcher,
yeah. Rogue Butcher works. I'd play Rogue Butcher, that sounds fun.
Dungeon Butcher.
The word butcher is only used in...
yeah, there needs to be more butcher titles. Cooler Butcher. The Butcher, Wild Hunt. Yeah. Run out.
Yeah, we should really start that consultancy business where we advise people to take stupider names.
Better and stupider.
Yeah.
Butcher and stupider.
So what about the name Distance, Marsh?
Nice segue, Tom.
Thanks, Marsh.
It's a good name. It probably isn't, actually. It's probably a rubbish name.
Yeah. It's like,
Can't really search for distance.
No. No, you can't really. What was the preceding game? Nitronic Rush. Was a game by the same developers in a similar vein, which is kind of like a arcade racer time trial up with
kind of a rhythm action.
Yeah,
a rhythm game as well.
It's like an obstacle game, I
Yeah.
guess. You're kind of going across this assault course of fast approaching near objects, which look a bit like they've been drawn in the Tron style.
Are you completing laps? Are the tracks like looped,
No.
or is it just you're going...
Point to point.
Okay.
I mean, actually, I don't know. I mean, maybe because there are a lot of user-generated levels, maybe users have made point-to-point races. You can race other players as well, but as far as I know, the ones I've played have just been point-to-point races. But yeah, Distance is the spiritual sequel, Kickstarted spiritual sequel to Nitronic Rush, which I think was made by a bunch of DigiPen students while they were students.
Yeah, which means it's owned by DigiPen.
Oh, really?
They would own the IP
Hence
after
the
that.
name change.
Which is,
It's
yeah.
a change. Which is a kind of shame, because Nitronic Rush is kind of more evocative name in some ways than Distance, which feels a bit... Distance sounds a bit kind of sparse and sober in a way that maybe the game isn't... It's quite, I suppose...
It's quite dark, isn't it?
It's quite dark, but yeah. Well, how did you describe it to me, Tom? I remember you gave
I
me...
said it was like, imagine you're a car and you're having a nightmare. That's Distance.
Yeah.
Car nightmare.
Yeah, it is.
It's
It
a
really
car
is. It's kind of terrifying, actually. There's a lot of... It's weird how much... it's obviously quite abstract. It's like, as I say, in this Tron-style environment with, strange monolithic shapes that pass you by and transparent roadways and kind of frilled with neon, and there are giant lasers and stuff. But it's also kind of shot with an eye to horror movie aesthetic.
Yeah.
So the world seems like, in as much as, this game has a plot at all, you appear to be some kind of car AI, or like an AI in a simulation. And, the simulation is exploding, basically. And you've got to drive for reasons, because reasons. And, as that happens, the world, so as you progress through the campaign, which is a kind of short sequence, maybe 10 levels, I can't remember exactly how many, the world becomes increasingly kind of tortured, and there are more kind of bubbles of reality that you pass through, and the world rips itself apart and reconfigures around you. And as it's doing this, like, the palette suddenly kind of alarmingly changes, or suddenly the screen becomes really high contrast and grainy, and there's also kind of ripping kind of electronic music that soundtracks your travel through the world. And I don't know, it's just such a kind of exciting, thrilling experience. I'm not really into car games, but, I could get behind this one.
It doesn't feel like... You're not already... You're literally a car, I know, but there's nothing about the mechanics of a car that apply to the thing you're driving.
Oh no, you can skid back and left and right. There's no kind of feeling that you're going to lift the wheels as you turn a corner or anything like that. You're completely kind of stuck to the track, unless you jump off it. Because you can jump. Cars can jump. Of course they can.
Fly?
And fly!
Absolutely.
And when you are in the air, you can use the right analog stick, because you're presumably using a pad by this. I don't think there's any other control scheme that really makes any sense. To deploy aerial thrusters that then give you movement laterally and also forward and back. There's probably a better aircraft term for that, but I don't know what it is. And so you can kind of spin off at these kind of alarming trajectories and land on other road surfaces and carry on. So we start, driving on the ceiling, if you like. And obviously there are obstacles that come towards you at great speed, like jumps that you have to make, and there are giant saw blades for reasons that don't seem to make really any sense in the simulation or whatever it's proposed to simulate. And it's great fun. It's kind of easy. At least the campaign is. Apart from, it's got a few glitches. I know that the whole jumping off and landing on another road surface thing, obviously that's quite a high skill ceiling because you need to accurately gauge how far to kind of tap the analog stick in order to spin exactly the number of degrees you need to have all four wheels land on the surface. But sometimes it seems like the camera moves the second you do that. Sometimes the camera works out that what you're trying to do is flip to road surfaces, and sometimes the camera's like, what are you doing? Where are you going? Oh, goodbye. And then you'll just slide off into the abyss and explode. So I don't know quite what's going on there. I don't know if I'm just bad at it or whether...
No, I had the same problem, exactly the same problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's in early access, though, isn't it?
Yeah. That's a good point. I should say that.
Yeah.
It's considering it's in early access, it's an extremely finished feeling thing.
Yeah.
I'm quite glad to hear that it's easy. I mean, crashing in racing games tends to be the shittiest part, and it sounds like this is most fun just for its sort of aesthetic experience of the throbbing techno and neon, and
it's brilliant actually, because you can literally get sliced in half by a laser, and as long as you can continue enough momentum and make it to a checkpoint, your car regenerates. So you kind of limp on through entire sections with half a car, which I love. I just love.
Can you continue to steer? Or
Yes. But obviously
not very well.
Okay.
But yeah, you can even attempt to take off and jump and do all the things that you could do without half of you missing.
That's awesome.
Which is great.
You mentioned the flying and switching to surfaces not quite working and having to line up your wheels to the new surface. What happens if you don't? If you don't...
Well, it just doesn't necessarily work out that you're on that road surface, and gravity is kind of pre-cooked in the game. There's obviously some physics modelling that goes on in terms of your ability to use boosters, but it seems to be... gravity seems to switch depending on which road surface you were on. Or at least it's not quite clear if it hasn't and it just counts as riding on a wall. But then sometimes gravity will switch and you'll stick to the road, but sometimes you'll almost get to the road and gravity will remain in the preceding direction and you'll just kind of
slide off.
Nothingness. Yeah, which is really annoying.
It's really, really fixable though. I mean, if the gravity field above that road was just a bit bigger, it would divine what you're trying to do much more often. And I don't know if it's that simple, but that's all that needs to happen. It just needs, often you can sail off the road and turn correctly, be perfectly parallel with the road, but it just won't glue you to the road, and you just kind of sail off.
Oh, I'm so glad you had that problem as well. I was wondering if I was just shit.
No, it is a problem. The game's really cool though. I find something menacing about roads actually. Just really long roads, like long American roads that just go on and on and on and on. Almost like in an existentially worrying way that, there's just kind of nothing out there. And distance is a bit like that. Sometimes you go through these portals and it'll drop you into almost an untextured little patch where it's just concrete and, nothing. And then it'll snap you back into this world of colour and neon again. It's like these horrible little menacing, bits of, you've gone into the car underworld for a minute and then go back into car hell, which is much more fun.
The kind of major trade-off of the game is really exciting as well. Obviously there are obstacles and you can fly and stuff like that, but the main kind of thing which gives it texture is the fact that you have a boost, I guess you could call it a nitronic rush. And you hold down A to boost, allows you to continue accelerating. But as you do so, you start to overheat, and these LEDs slowly light up along the back of your car.
That's really cool.
And then they go beep, 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 and then you explode. But you can obviously stop boosting, but you're going to add seconds to your time, which is not what you want to do. But as soon as you go through one of these checkpoints, which not only regenerates your car, it also cools you down. And the checkpoints are just really brilliantly placed so that, it starts beeping with a millisecond to go before you explode as you pass through it. And there are other things you can do to cool down, like you do aerial jumps and spins and things like that. And for some reason that cools you down. But it's just that fundamental tension of building up enough speed to go fast enough to get through the checkpoint before your attempts to go fast cause you to explode. It's quite a nice, it's a really nice trade-off, and it works really well.
Reminds me of the aesthetic kind of, the menacing, like, car doom thing. Reminds me of another game called Thumper, which is also, I think, in early access or heading there, which is another just kind of a straight line rhythm game where you play as a kind of chrome arrow firing at insane speeds through dark, horrible, but beautiful environments made of, like, crystals and beautiful, slick, kind of metal structures that make no sense, and you just kind of sail through them. This is just, like, the best thing to get high to, I imagine. But, it gives you that similar kind of vibe. That's much nowhere near finished in the distances.
And I'd love to have played Distance when I was a student. Yeah. But one of the, something I wanted to ask you guys, because obviously, still in early access, the campaign's quite short. It's going to grow some, but the developers say it's still going to be short when it's a finished game. And what they're trying to do a Trackmania thing where the kind of sale of the game is the fact that it has an amazing level editor with it, and presumably there are already 350 user-made levels already in early access. When it finally comes out, there'll be many, many more, and the peer review process, because it's on Steam Workshop, will have produced quite an abundant supply of really good levels. But I was wondering whether that's how satisfying that is to you guys. I know this is. I mean, I totally understand what they're doing, and I appreciate it. But also, user-generated levels just never feel special to me in the same way that a pre-authored campaign does. I know that a lot of that's just down to, like, my psychology, my psychological reaction to the idea of having something packaged and given to me. But also, I think, there is something to say for campaigns, in as much as what they do is that they parcel up a sequence of kind of learnt mechanics, and they allow you to make that journey through them sequentially. And you're never going to get that with user-generated levels, because the mechanics are already there. You're never going to get new user-generated mechanics, for one thing. And you're also never going to go through that same learning process over a period of time. Even if the levels are really expertly made and really intelligent, and maybe they even do novel things with the existing mechanics, they're just never going to scratch that same itch. Is that something you experience?
Definitely. Exactly the same way, I think. But I also think it depends on the game. I think there's some sets of mechanics where they just feel nice to perform. There's something tactile about them, or physical about the actions you're performing, and it sounds kind of like Distance is about like that. Like you describing that, the risk reward of boosting and hitting those checkpoints, that sounds like it would be a really satisfying thing to do again and again and again in a kind of endless mode, which I suppose is what the levels are providing. Like, the mechanics won't grow anymore, but you can play it forever and go through different terrain or different obstacles or the same obstacles in different orders. Like, that sounds like it might be quite satisfying if that core mechanic is satisfying to perform over and over again in itself. But I absolutely get the kind of psychological thing of this just doesn't feel meaningful in the same way. It feels more like I'm wasting my time, I guess, because I'm not being tricked into feeling like I'm making progress through a finite set of things that, as you say, have been packaged up and given to you, which is like the worst fucking bullshit, like, exploited by Ubisoft sort of the thinking. Yeah. The fact that, if they just packaged up some of those custom levels and
disappear
had and put like achievements in a percentage meter, maybe I would feel like I was climbing towards a finish point.
Products.
Tasty products. I had this exact same thing with Portal 2, where, of course, they included just the most beautiful puzzle creator. Like, Valve built these beautiful tools where anyone could make puzzles. I've never downloaded a single user. I could happily play more Portal, but weird ingrained bias has stopped me from doing it, even though we run mod columns every week about these great Portal maps.
I played, I don't know, maybe at most 6, and then that was it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I mean, actually with those there was, even the highest rated Portal levels from users aren't as good as I know people are probably going to be writing in angrily as sort of saying that, but they just aren't. There's a feeling of kind of polish and that you get from Valve's levels because they've just been user tested to fuck, and you can't do that if you're just a dude with a low editor on your own.
But like I think with some games, and I think Porter 2 is one of them, even if it was as good, even if it was better, it would still be just like, that's not canon.
It's just not
It's
canon.
fan fiction, isn't it? And like, I don't want to read fucking, like, it doesn't matter how much I like a set of books or the world in which it's set, and how good a piece of fan fiction is written. I don't want to read fan fiction, that doesn't count.
I've been writing a piece for you, actually, ages, about puzzle games.
I forgot about that.
Which I've not yet finished. I will finish this week, I promise. Maybe. And but one of the interesting things that come away from talking to various puzzle game developers is that my theory, not this is an extrapolation from what they've said, but I think the way that you generate a sense of pace in puzzle games particularly, but I think this is probably applicable to all other genres, is actually learning, like actually the process of understanding, learning a thing is actually what generates the sense of pace through a game. It's not beating puzzles that matters, it's understanding them. And I think that's true whenever you come across a mechanic. There's always a learning process when you're engaging with a new mechanic, even if it's not explicitly to unlock a puzzle. And I think that's true in distance. Like, the first time you're told you can fly, then you're presented with a problem that you can use flying to solve, and that's really exhilarating. And you don't, there's no reason to do that another 10 times, because it would get boring.
I guess for me, there's sometimes games, once I've reached beyond that point of learning, games become much more relaxing because I'm no longer under that stress of trying to work something out, and I can just sort of sit back and enjoy, in certain games, that kind of rote feeling of just going through and accomplishing things. So like, even if I'm no longer adding to my mental map of how something works. But then at the same time, I often just sort of feel bored of all games because I look at them and go, well, that looks a lot like all the other games I've played, doesn't it? And
it's because you've already learned that. You've learned that thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree. But also, I think there's exceptions. I'm not learning anything anymore when I sit and play FIFA. And within like an hour of Papers, Please, I think it's introduced all the mechanics it's got, and you've got, as good as you need to be at doing it, and then it in its story mode introduces trade-offs to compel you to do worse than you know that you can do in order to maximize other stats and stuff like that. But then it's also got an endless mode, which I find actually quite compelling to just play through because it's just
because you like turning people away from borders.
Yeah, quite like
imprisoning their wives.
Efficiently doing my job and checking the thing and going, that caught you out.
Jesus.
Would you like to be a cog in the machine endlessly forever with no sleep or rest? Papers, please.
Yes.
This sounds fine, yeah.
So, yeah, there's something comforting about being a cog in a machine. No pressure on you to learn or grow or challenge or think. And sometimes late at night, that's what I want.
I think it's only a problem for games which have those arcs. So Minecraft is obviously, it's just a total sandbox, and Minecraft is what it is because of adventure maps and the things that people have made and shared with each other. But that has it has a learning curve that you have to go to Wikipedia to discover in terms of the crafting and where to go to get what and stuff like that. But it doesn't kind of pressure you into that. It doesn't force you into a series of puzzle chambers, which I actually kind of really dislike as a format. Then it's free to just kind of, you feel more constrained. Like if the game gives you a series of challenges in a linear order, then you complete it and you feel like you completed it and it feels insular. Whereas with a game like Minecraft, which is just endless and open.
Well, you don't want to be suddenly locked into a room and say, you've got to work out how to use this tool.
Yeah, it'd be useless, But also, psychologically, you don't have that sense that you're consuming an insular product with Minecraft. So you put into Minecraft and you go away and do whatever you want, and there's no pressure to do anything or complete anything. And that experience is then never closed off for you. Whereas if you complete Portal, then I think mentally you've just closed that off and you've closed the book on it. You finished the chapter. And it's this linear format that, you watch television like that, you read books like that. Way people consume media is start at the start, end at the end, and then never go back to it. Games that don't propose that structure do extremely well with DLC and user-made content.
Yeah, I guess that's why Minecraft mods are are so popular, is because it does have that endless feeling, and then it's got a kind of structure to the learning curve through it that mods can then ape, but have you doing thematically different things. So if you add a mod that lets you make a nuclear reactor in the game, the structure of that challenge is exactly the same as making your first stove in the base game. It's just larger and has different sprites that people have added to it, basically. And
yeah, there's something. I've talked to a lot of people who feel open world games make them feel anxious because it's just they feel tremendous pressure when there's nothing
telling you what
objective.
to do.
Yeah, it's almost like a psychological pressure that they suddenly feel like, oh god, I'm failing. I'm just standing here, I'm failing because I'm not completing something. Whereas I'm the opposite. Like I hate the puzzle chamber structure because I hate being tested. And like growing up, I've been tested every fucking stage. I've done fucking exams and things, and it's always just an anxious scenario. And I don't want to be like, especially things that do explicitly like the Talos Principle and like Portal. You know, they're going to say, "Oh, we're going to test you. We're going to measure your IQ now." Porn. What are you going to do about it? I say, "Oh no, I was going to play Minecraft." That's what I love. I'd much rather build a giant skull fortress, and no one can tell me I've failed.
Maybe I was taught too well at school to enjoy that feedback.
It may be so.
Yeah, give me my merit badge. That's what it's all about. I don't know, I hope Distance does find that as that audience for user-generated content. And I don't know, I really do. I think apart from the part of the fact that I want to be taught new mechanics, as we've been saying, I kind of want that campaign, because as I said, it goes through it and the world starts kind of unravelling. And it becomes quite alarming aesthetically, and you know, I really want to see where that goes. You know, I want them to push that to the limits and have a card game that really kind of terrifies me at an existential level. I don't think a card game has previously done that to me. It's on the way there.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd like to see where it ends up.
Just a blank, featureless plane.
Yeah.
What have you been playing, Tom?
Playing Dead Noughts. Speaking of blank, featureless expanses of Doom, Dead Noughts is about being in a spaceship and running a crew of Dead Noughts who go and explore abandoned vessels in the depths of space, which have all been, they're just drifting wrecks, and you go in there and loot them and complete missions in there.
It's quite a cool game now.
It's a good
It's
name.
evocative and
Dead
sort of
Noughts.
descriptive. And,
Yeah.
It's
good.
They dead, the Noughts.
The Noughts that you're sending out are not dead, but
Right.
they soon will be because
Oh, I
it's
see.
quite fucking hard. Also, yeah, most people you discover are dead or aliens. But it's the best thing about it is that it envisages a spaceship as being like a submarine, and you're kind of, as the captain of this escapade, you're rooted in this tiny capsule, and in front of you there's a circular display which shows you like the icons of your men moving around the ship that they've boarded. But you can also press Q or E to look left or right at panels that surround you. And it's got this kind of cast iron aesthetic to the UI, which is beautifully chunky and slightly rusted. And you can click on things to flick switches and bring up new information. And it's kind of on the right hand side, it's like that's where you get your information about your ship and your mission and things, which flash on screens. And the left hand side is just some kind of really creepy Facebook interface wall, which records and it tells you everything about your Dead Noughts' inner thoughts, fears, desires, and what they think of each other. There's literally a button you can press to make a part of the UI flip around to reveal a relationship grid where there are lines drawn between all of your Dead Noughts, and they'll kind of change colour and change based on their fading relationships.
Well, that sounds fucking great.
Yeah, which sounds great. It's not great though.
Oh.
Not yet. I mean, I played it thinking it was an early access game, thinking that there's going to be more to this at some point. The problem is it's so hard that I couldn't survive enough missions to see those relationships develop. To see that grid deteriorate, to have my Dead Noughts actually fall out with each other, and the consequences for them actually falling out is kind of just frustrating. So, like, if one of them is kind of mentally unstable, they can just flip out and stop taking orders from you, and that can kind of fuck you up if it's your guy with the best machine gun, and they just stop doing what you tell them, and that's just kind of annoying, and just dictate over my entire crew, and you're all dead. Because I think the game's just too punishing. It's made by the people who made Safe House Diaries.
Oh yeah.
And that was a game about sending people, it was a game about having a bunch of really flawed people trying to survive together and then sending them off onto missions. And if you send off people who dislike each other, they're more likely to get eaten or suffer. and some of them are just kind of racist and just won't like other people because of, you know, they're black or they're a bit sexist or something. And it models all this stuff, and Dead Noughts has all that as well on the giant invasive Facebook wall to your left. And you can read into their histories and their backgrounds, and it'll tell you their psychological problems and everything, which is fucking great. I love that stuff. And it's all randomly generated. It generates their names, and you get a picture of them, and it gives you all their personality traits. But that never, like, filters down into the actual thing you're doing, which the actual kind of RTS squad management stuff where you're clicking around and hacking systems to explore a spaceship. Like, the two systems feel too distant from one another to ever kind of make it as interesting as it really should be.
It's weird because Zephyr's Diaries like combines the two so well. It has like, it's about the risk reward of two guys whose skills really complement each other, even though they hate each other. And you know, it's the concept of every buddy cop movie, except no, these guys actually fucking hate each other, and they will die because of it. But like, it encourages you to kind of play that risk reward of that stuff.
Zephyr's was quite binary in that it would just it would give you just text results for actions. So you set people off, and it will just send you a text report back saying, oh, you know, they hate each other and therefore they fell out. Whereas that kind of, it's just not clear when you're watching this very abstracted kind of RTS thing play out in front of you on this tiny little round screen. You're not seeing their faces or their actions. You're getting a little ticker of things on the right hand side, and it's just the feedback perhaps isn't good enough. It's possible that all that stuff is actually happening, but there's no way for you to really pass it because you're just watching icons move around on the deck of a ship, which is a real shame because I love the vibe of it. It's like there's no music. It's all just ambient kind of sonar noise. It's the kind of background hiss that you hear when you turn on a microphone, and just you realise that the world is making all this sound that you never really hear. The kind of hiss of dust, and you know, it's that kind of sound. That's the sound of deep space in Dead Noughts. That's always playing. It's a crackly sound, and sometimes you know, you'll just start losing signal, and everything will start fuzzing up. And you have to kind of tap an icon to switch power to boost the signal and stuff. It's got this really tactile feeling of being in control of this rickety thing, which I absolutely love. And just the interface is beautiful. I wish more games would be like that. That to say, like, it's quite old-fashioned about it. The fact that it is this kind of cast iron interface that you're kind of surrounded in. Like, UIs feel like really abstract now. They're kind of floating hologram. Like, Assassin's Creed is the worst for this, where you're in revolutionary Paris and all the UI is just really super modern, as though Apple had designed iconography that just never has no roots in the time at all. And there's kind of been this rebellion against the idea of having UI that is set, like, aesthetically, yeah, exactly. That actually tied into the, what's the word?
Diegetic?
Diegetic, yeah. That's what Apple moved away from with their latest interface thing, where they used to, the note thing used to be just represented by a notebook icon.
Oh, I see.
That's
a different thing.
skeuomorphism.
A skeuomorphism.
Which is where you take
things from the real world and make them into icons. Like, you know, your camera app on your phone will be a picture of like an old Pentax or something like that.
Yeah. And I think UIs used to be, I remember Abe's Odyssey, Abe's Odyssey takes place in this kind of steampunky, grimy world, and all the UI was like this grimy metal, like chunks of metal, and there was a really cohesive aesthetic to UI design and world design that, you know, it clearly been made by the same artists, literally, which has just totally disappeared. And
the Fallout games as well, I remember how.
Oh yeah, they did, yeah. Yeah, Fallout is actually really good, relevant point of comparison to Dead Noughts, actually, because it has a very similar kind of vision of futuristic technology. It's been this big chunky, you know, you see the bolts and you flick the switches, and it's very, very similar to that. But that's why I like it. But I wish more UI would kind of go back to those old days of, I don't know, is it just out of fashion? Is it just lame to not have a...
Yeah, I don't know. I go back and forth on this. I think it can be appropriate in different circumstances, obviously, but that's what a stupid thing to say. The thing that is obviously true is true.
Depends what kind of dinosaur.
You know, I sometimes I think there's a value just to not pissing about and just delivering the information as kind of transparent a way as possible. And sometimes that means you just got to put numbers on a screen in the corner, and actually that's fine. But yeah, I on the other hand, Ubisoft's system of basically putting a chevron above everybody's head with kind of like, you know, holographic tooltips that seem to appear in a cloud of, you know, weird symbols and stuff. That's neither within the fiction, nor is it transparent in any particular way.
It's not even within the meta fiction, the kind of you're within a hologram stuff. It's not like justified by the fact that this is all in a simulation.
Yeah.
It's just it's a UI designer has been asked to design the UI without any kind of thoughts about how the rest of the game is being designed or it looks. But I like the first Shogun where your everything was on like papyrus type textured kind of papery things, and I was like rustling through sheaves in order to flick through units. I like that. I like that feeling of interacting with a thing.
Yeah,
might physically exist.
Yeah, there have been some very bad UIs based on that though, where they just kind of, I suppose it's, yeah, well they just kind of oversell the theme of the game through the textures behind each of their numbers, and I don't know if you really need to do that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you're attaching a number to a health stat, that's already so abstract, you're not really going to be able to bring that back, are you?
Well, the worst was always like old flight sims that would be in like an airport's office.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You would like to stay at the game, you click on a filing cabinet. To start the game, you click on a telephone.
That's how every menu was in the 1990s.
Yeah.
Never had, a pre-rendered desk was the way it always worked.
Yeah, shit.
God, I remember, I think it was Stealth F117A or something like that. It was one of the first flight sims I ever played, and you had to, click on the maps to tell you where you were going, and, pick up a phone to, I don't know, activate a mission or something.
This came back from Wing Commander, where you'd just be portrayed, you'd have a scene in front of you of a hangar, and you'd have to mouse over bits, and then a door would open, it'd be like, save game. What? And the stupidest thing about that was that you're literally sitting in front of a computer interface that's just scrolling nonsense lore at you. It's like, you could just have that be the save game button, you tap the word save game there on the screen. Oh dear. Anyway, that's a peculiar rant.
I do really like how you guys played Mirror Moon. I know I talked about it in the past, but
that's got a really cool.
Completely. I mean, it's not the same sort of thing because the function of that interface is purposefully obscure, and it's not necessary. It's not necessary. Like, I mean, it exists to be an obscure interface, but it's very tactile. Like part of the game is you go down to you pick a location, you fly your little pod to it through space, and you land on a planet. You do things on the planet. Or you spend a lot of time walking around the planet trying to work out what you're meant to do, and then how you use the things that you find there. It's been exciting, exploratory ways. But even getting to the planet's tricky, because you need to boot up your spacecraft, which is just represented to you by this kind of floating panel of knobs and switches and dials and stuff in the middle of space, and you kind of play around poking things, and eventually one thing you'll poke will light up another thing, then you poke that, and then this will light up 3 other things, and you realise that when you move these 3 other things, like this little viewfinder pans across a star map, you're like, I think I know what I'm doing. But most of the switches don't really do anything apart from allow you to flip another switch, but there's something really pleasing about everything kind of flunks, clunk, plunk, and whirs, and, starts spinning, and, it's great.
It's like in a good flight sim, where there's the starting, just the simply turning the engines on and kind of warming up each different part of your craft before you actually take off. Like, that's a really satisfying, wonderful thing to simulate in a game. I think also that, the technology of a game tells you so much about its world, just the way it's constructed and the way it's trying to tell you information. The fact that Mirror Moon is so obscure tells you so much about what you're in for, really. If you balk at your ship, you're not going to play that game. It's not for you. It's for people who are just curious enough to want to flick all the switches and poke, and the way you succeed and get to a planet then sets you up for the type of inquisitiveness you need to solve the increasingly obscure, crazy puzzles that you have to complete.
Yeah. Go back to Dead North, though. Is it savable at this point?
Oh, is it in early access?
It's not. I don't think it is. I'd have to check that, but I think it is actually out now. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe I'll play it some more. I think it's just a bit too hard, and you can't tell what's going on enough. When you have complex simulation systems that are interacting with each other, you just have to tell the player what's happening sometimes. You can't intuit that the reason why that guy isn't taking orders is because the person next to him he's so pissed off with him, he just stop taking orders, is just shouting at him. You're not seeing any of that. You have to kind of just say it somehow, and perhaps Dead North just doesn't communicate it well enough.
Sounds like a shame, and it sounds like there's a really cool set of systems there. I hope they
really cool vibe as well, really nice and menacing kind of theme to it.
Dead North 2.
Dead North, yeah.
Shall we do questions from questions?
Yes. Give us some questions, Graham.
Give us the questions.
I don't have to. The readers, or listeners rather, have done it for us.
Well done.
Menthol Penguin writes, Dear Mills and Boone's Bar. Roll with it, he says. What's the most erotic thing that has happened to you in a video game? And what's the most erotic thing you've done to someone else in a video game? Much love, Menthol Penguin. Winky face.
There's not much that's erotic in video games, generally speaking. Like, I find the simulation of sex in Mass Effect and things like that to be explicitly unerotic.
It's like watching, Thunderbird dolls.
Yeah.
Trying to copulate.
Rotting.
Yeah. To make tiny little Thunderbird dolls. Same degree of clumsiness that you'd expect. Yeah, there's nothing... I've never been turned on by a video game. Like, that's a sad admission, really, because,
Because they try so hard.
They try really fucking hard. I was talking earlier with these gamer guys about Fran from Final Fantasy XII, which is like a collision of 5 or 6 different fetishes, desperately hoping to appeal to someone by accident, perhaps, that might be into one of them, but not put off by any of the others. And that kind of design persists throughout. It's not good. It's not sexy at all.
No, I mean, I once went into Second Life for journalistic purposes and had sex with a virtual prostitute, and who was controlled by another woman somewhere else in the world, and it was deeply, deeply unerotic. Not least of all because my in-game penis, which I had bought because it was user-made, failed to function because it had
you had digital erectile dysfunction.
Yeah, because it had security controls, so other people can't touch and manipulate your penis against your will.
Your erection was security controlled.
Yes, and I couldn't work out how to add her to the permissions list. So I was cock blocked by my own e-penis, I believe was the line we used when I wrote about this in PC Gamer. But basically we still did it in quotation, air quotes. But it
doesn't
was
matter,
just
love, she says. But it happens to everybody sometimes.
It was just two 3D models bumping against each other with the very visible flaccid cock in between, making no penetration whatsoever.
Was it physical models to flop around?
No, but it would have had things like the reason I bought it. I bought a quality penis.
Of course.
The reason I bought it was
how much does that go for, by the way? Just interest.
I can't remember now.
Sorry.
But the after being stimulated, it would grow hard, and then it would release a little particle effect to finish off.
Right.
So it's like a sex ed for robots.
Did you have control over when that was executed, so to speak?
Well, I could masturbate, but I couldn't do that at the same time as performing the sex animations, and those sex animations weren't doing anything because she wasn't able to actually interact with it because of the security controls, which meant I realised at this point that basically this sex would never end because I couldn't orgasm. And so there was just a point after we'd run the allotted 30 minutes that I paid for when I would, type something in to go, thank you, that's enough now.
Oh my God.
Very nice.
You faked an orgasm.
Goodbye. Yes.
What was the mechanic by which you couldn't touch you? Was she just not allowed to?
Well, you would just get like a little log message in the chat saying, access denied.
Don't touch that. Oh my goodness, no one's going to beat that story, ever.
No.
When you say quality penis...
Well, the first one I got was just like a permanently inflated balloon animal. It was just like...
What?
It was just, I bought one...
cheap knockoff penis.
Yeah,
like a giraffe.
that I bought from a guy at a nudie-free sex party somewhere in Second Life.
Right.
By going to a free sex party, because you could just get a list of all the locations in Second Life and double-click to teleport there, and there were, people daisy-chained in various positions and stuff like that, and, I took a screenshot, and if you would take a screenshot in Second Life using the screenshot key, I don't think I had fraps at this point, it would make like a camera shutter sound, and so everyone wouldn't know, and I got told off. I was like, oh, sorry.
Oh, really? I got told off.
Scarpered off because they didn't like it. I was taking photos of them because that was considered impolite at this, I guess, like swingers, dogging sex party. But then I just, stood in the living room of this giant seaside house and said, where do I get a penis? And some guy
Global
offered to send
chat.
me one. And like one guy said, 300 Second Life bucks, and another guy said 100 Second Life bucks, and so I went for the cheaper one, and it was rubbish. So then I went to a shop, because you get these kind of strip malls, in the American sense of strip malls, which are just full of body parts and women. It's like the most grotesque, warped form of American capitalism that you can ever find is these Second Life strip malls, which are just full of stores advertising like literally objectified body parts, breasts and asses and stuff like that you can buy and append to your character model, or just pictures of women where the light switches to green if they're logged in at that point.
Oh my God.
Pretty gross. I mean, this was 2006 now. And since then, Linden Labs, who make Second Life, did a whole bunch of stuff to try and filter out the sex content and make it more of an opt-in experience so that kids couldn't stumble across it. Because they've really been struggling over the last 10 years, pretty much, in order to make a go of that. But it still doesn't work. Like, I wrote a story, because they announced Second Life 2. They announced basically, changed a bunch of staff after Rob, the Sims smart man, left. After he left, and they changed a bunch of staff and announced Second Life 2 and stuff like that. I wrote a story on it, and I got a very polite, nice email from someone at Linden Labs saying that the things I'd said about the sex industry in the game weren't true. So I logged into the game, picked a random innocuous location on the map, teleported there, and it was advertising sex work. And so I did that, took a screenshot of it and sent it to him and said, no, look, this is still a problem in your game. You can still stumble across this stuff. And as long as that's the case, why would I want my imaginary kids to play that game? But, yeah.
Did he reply? Or she?
He did, and he said, thank you very much, I understand. Thank you for letting us know about this. Fair enough, basically. But the article I wrote wasn't just about that. I interviewed some of the people that actually performed this sex work in the game, and it was really fascinating. They were almost all people who had been doing online sex chat for years, basically, via ICQ for fun and stuff like that. I spoke to a woman who said she was a personal assistant working in Washington, D.C. Well, no way to verify these things because they wouldn't give me real names or anything like that, but they spoke to me at length and all seemed like healthy adults who wrote in full sentences and stuff like that. They weren't mentals. So
why not?
Kind of
Why not?
People are, I can if it was just advertised as sex life, and everyone goes on there and it's like everyone knows what they're getting into, then it's pretty fine, really, isn't it?
Well, I mean,
express what they want.
The sex industry is obviously a pretty horrible, exploitative place in the real world, but when it's a virtual representation of that, and it's just people at computers who, if they can afford a computer, probably aren't in too bad economic situations, and the money that they're getting is by and large just Second Life fun bucks, and even if there are slightly dodgy ways to get it out of the game and turn it into real money, you're not ever going to make proper real life money from it. And so people are volunteering for it. But then there's still something iffy about it that I can never quite settle on. There is something...
I have more questions about this. But mainly, it's really fascinating that there would be, a trade of body parts. And that would just tell you so much about how people are attempting to idealise those parts independently, like a boob. They're trying to sell a boob and everyone's trying to create these shitty 3D models of what the perfect breast is. Or someone, it's someone who likes penises, who wants to create the best penis, and there are all these competing through a kind of free market of body parts. What does that end up looking like? What
Randian utopia of penises.
Yeah, so it's just what do people end up looking like? Do they end up super warped and weird, or is it?
It's not. It's kind of more just straight up trashy, tight tops and lots of cleavage and looking essentially like a sort of a Barbie doll or a kind of you've had way too much plastic surgery sort of stripper look. That's often the thing
so
that people go for, really hypersexualized and in a way that you wouldn't ever actually associate with ideals of beauty. You would associate it simply with just that kind of something trashy about it. But then, more broadly, Second Life became, I don't know if it still is, but it became a platform for fetishists of all kinds. And views on how healthy those things are vary. But, you could go to Furry World, or you could go to kind of fantasy BDSM world based on some highly questionable erotic fantasy fiction with problematic views on women. It's quite a book series I can't remember the name of. But then you could also find zones which were about what gets called age play. This is a whole dark area.
I don't like where that's going.
But, you can kind of imagine what age play is.
Right.
And it's, presumed or meant to be between consenting adults who are simply pretending to be ages which they are not.
Right.
Towards whichever extreme of that spectrum you want to imagine. But, that's deeply unsettling. Even though there is not necessarily any actual crime happening. And, you kind of, it was deeply creepy to visit these places anyway.
It's really interesting because virtual worlds basically, a lot of virtual worlds still aren't policed. And it's just kind of perhaps a positive thing that people are, even as disagreeable as they may be to us, are actually kind of expressing what they secretly actually really want. So that, it's not hiding this stuff or making it, or trying to, suppress it. And maybe it's better if people understand that, humans have just a wide range of, humans could fetishize almost anything. And that these exist and that people might be acting on them and it might be hurting people, and, it's better to know about that stuff or just kind of come to, accept it.
I agree with that. I think there is a lot that's damaging in our society about the need to repress certain things from public discourse, and the shame that comes from that need not be. And that stretches to acts that are perfectly acceptable and acts that are becoming societally acceptable now, but weren't for a very long time. And then also swings the other way to stuff that is well.
But also, I kind of disagree to some extent, although I do think we are rightfully becoming a more permissive society, and it's good that we do erode taboos about certain things. There's also an extent to which things which should not be socially acceptable within your community can be reinforced to you, because you can now go online and find other people who are themselves pariahs in their own community, or would be if they ever express their views there, but find solace in fellow deviants across the internet. And actually, I think that gives them a kind of acceptance, which is a false acceptance, and there are things that I think are just socially irresponsible and bad, like, for example, paedophilia, which I don't think paedophiles should seek solace and succour elsewhere on the internet from fellow paedophiles.
I guess paedophilia is a good example because all debate and public discourse around paedophilia is entirely suppressed, and the Brass Eye special was an amazing example of how just any speech about that subject is just shut down just by popular, mainstream discourse. And in America, there are certain it is an aspect of human sexuality. It has been for recorded history, and it's kind of just pretending that isn't a part of the human psyche is surely worse than just kind of, looking at it properly and saying, how can we actually fix this as a problem? Kind of places like Second Life that give voice to those communities and give voice to those things isn't necessarily entirely just an icky, gross thing outright, as much as it kind of instinctively seems that way.
I don't know that it necessarily generates debate, though, is the thing.
Just indulges it, maybe.
Yeah, that's the concern. I think these things ought to be kind of discussed in a way, as you say, so that proper solutions can be found. But I don't know that these Second Life communities necessarily do that so much as just let these people find each other and then act out those fantasies in a way that, there's constant debate about whether is that a release valve that stops it spreading to the real world, or does it simply encourage it? And I have no idea, and I don't think anyone has any idea. But there's certainly a spectrum to these things, with that at the most extreme end, and the furries who seem relatively harmless as far as I can tell, as far as I know, in real life and in their virtual incarnation. And then the kind of the middle BDSM stuff, which I'm absolutely fine with, but then there was a lot of it which tipped into kind of misogyny and slavery in a way that was maybe you can debate whether the people who are consenting and taking part in that, are they still being exploited in some way for feelings which they have, or self-esteem issues they have, or any of that sort of stuff. But then that's true in the real world as well, and when it comes to consenting adults, fuck knows. I wrote a box out about it.
50 words and a picture.
Yep.
Well, I don't think we already answered his question there.
Well, I think
he asked about erotica and he got muck.
Nothing erotic in games, nothing at all.
No, it's rubbish.
Sin writes, hi. No pun. I firstly wanted to thank you for the show, and then also wanted to point out that Tom F. needs to be praised by all, and I personally think it's fantastic, and encouraged on his new YouTube series on game maker and game development. It is really good and extremely pragmatic, and could be very helpful to anyone considering doing a game. You will be paced along and have things happening on screen within a few evenings of spare time. Already in episode 1, Tom F. talks about that moment you realise that you truly want to make games. I've previously heard about this when Double Fine do their Amnesia Fortnite event. They talk about when a game really starts feeling like a game, and I think it may be a special moment when it's no longer just sprites moving around. Maybe that's about the systems now adding up to the player having a purpose in the world. What do you think is the addition, it's okay to get metaphysical, that creates that moment when a game becomes a game instead of just a bunch of dead sprites? Regards, Sim.
I think that's very interesting, actually. The point at which a game becomes a game, rather than just. Well, I think it comes down to having some kind of obstacle, and so I mean, you may. When you originate a series of mechanics, you presumably have a general goal that you want to achieve within, say, a level, if you're going to divide it up into levels. And then you presumably put some obstacles down to prevent that from being trivial. And then maybe you'll have made it impossible. And so then you tweak those obstacles until it becomes possible, but not trivial. And at that point you have a game.
Do you think the obstacles, though, are core to the game experience? Because that immediately presumably discounts things like Dear Esther, which I know you're not a fan of, and nor am I, but
I am a fan of it, actually.
Are you?
Yeah, I quite like it.
Gone Home doesn't really have obstacles.
No, that's a good point, actually. I was thinking more explicitly kind of
Gamey games.
ludic games, yeah, really. I suppose when you come to... Well, I don't know, actually. I mean, I think you can apply a similar narrative logic to that. Narratives have obstacles and tension in them as well, and so you're looking. In Gone Home, there is a mystery, and if it was just told, if the reason why your family isn't in the house when you get there is just told to you in the beginning, then that's the same as being presented with a goal with no obstacles. And so when they hit upon the idea that maybe you have to unravel these things in stages, and maybe there are, you need to excavate the house in order to discover this stuff slowly over a period of time, then that's where the game emerges, I guess. With Dear Esther, it's slightly, I suppose, again, it's the same thing. I mean, you're not really sure what's going on at the beginning of Dear Esther, and gradually, through exploration of that world, the narrative is unfolded to you. But I mean, that's not so much of an obstacle, but in terms of, because those games are narrative rather than mechanically led, I think you translate the things I've just said about game mechanics into whatever kind of equivalent there is in narrative exposition.
And I like to think of it as simply like the moment call and response happens with the system, then it's a game. So I think even the moment you press forward and your character moves forward, then it's a game of sorts. It's a video game of sorts, and it may be fucking boring and shit and bad, and maybe you shouldn't.
Oh yeah, I'm not actually. Just to clarify, I'm not saying that's the point at which it gets the dictionary definition of game. I'm just saying that's the point at which, when making it, you're like, there's a game.
Yeah. But it's interesting the extent to which you have to, like, if you are just going to press forward and go forward, the extent to which you fill that world with enough richness to make it interesting enough to be considered worthwhile. I guess that's when it becomes like the worthwhileness of it is when it becomes a game, I suppose.
I think the call and response is definitely key, because I'm making a game in Game Maker, or at least trying to at great length. And I've done a lot of procedural generation stuff that generates a world and characters and generates some visuals, and then there's a kind of interface where you can move around parts that visualizes some of the world or the data that it's generating. But in the current build of it, there is not yet any way to then interact with that other than the moving around of parts of the world.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't feel like a game at all, because there is no call and response. Like, you can move stuff, but it doesn't respond to you in any meaningful way. You can't engage with the world that I've generated. And so I'm looking forward to that point, basically. And I've been there before, and I'm rebuilding it now. But the other thing I found was that even when there was a little bit of call and response, it didn't feel like a game until I kind of closed the loop, until it was a thing where it was call and response, and then I could call again in response to the
Based
response,
on what you just
basically.
learned,
You know, because I got to a point, at one point, where you could do a thing, it would respond, and then if you did anything else, it would crash. And it was like, you could kind of like complete a single level, but it didn't feel yet like a game at that point, because it didn't go on, or you couldn't then do another thing. It just felt like a sort of, like you push a button and a light comes on. That doesn't feel like a game until you can now push another button in response to that light having come on.
There's no progression, yeah. Yeah, we'll definitely link Tom Francis's Game Maker tutorial series, which is great.
Yeah. Stephen Malone writes, Dear gentlemen, in episode 65, Barbalians, I asked about the design of loot systems and gave an offhand comment about Destiny's loot system being rather shit. A few days ago, I actually bought Destiny. You hadn't played it at the time. And now having played it, I understand Chris's ensuing rant completely. Apologies for any dickness on my part for that comment.
Don't remember it. I didn't remember thinking it was a dick, though. But maybe I wasn't on that one. Who knows?
But playing Destiny inspired me to ask another, hopefully less dickish question. By putting excellent hover bike things in Destiny, Bungie seemed to have accidentally made an awesome replica of the speeder chase in Star Wars Return of the Jedi. Flying those things around Venus with some mates looks and feels exactly like the movie. Yeah. It's like a secret minigame. The question is, have you ever found a game that contains a secret minigame or other accidental thing? Thanks for reading. Stephen Malone.
Yeah, I thought there was an example of this before the podcast. I can't remember what it was now. So, that's rubbish. Oh, I suppose, actually, I was thinking of the way that the gravity gun probably originated, in as much as it probably grew in its design from being like an ability to manipulate objects within the world in a kind of gross way, to being a means by which you could project a radiator at somebody's head in multiplayer. And, that's obviously a side effect of the fact that you can pick up objects and move them around. I imagine picking up objects and moving them around came some way before being able to fire a toilet at somebody. But, yeah, actually firing toilets at somebody is really the end goal of any mechanism in games, I think.
Yeah.
Mini games in games that you make for yourself. Like, I think we've kind of accidentally told all these stories before, really. Anything where, everyone finds games within Far Cry's game systems. You build your own game inside that game. I build my own game inside Max Payne, which I've talked about before on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, we do it all the time.
Yeah, trying to do stunts in games. Like, I really like Just Cause 2 for that. My favourite was flying. There was this, really small, fast agency jet that you could fly towards the Mile High Club. Use the grappling hook to tether to the Mile High Club, which was like a flying airship party boat in the sky. Fire your grappling hook to connect to that, and then tether it to your plane, and then ride on top of your plane as it looped around the Mile High Club over and over and over again, because it was tethered to it, but the momentum of it just kept it going around and around and around, until eventually you would collide with one of the balloons and explode. But that was a great stunt to try and do over and over again. And then once you got it right, it was like, yes, this is fucking great.
I have a feeling this might be universal, but whenever you're flying a plane in a game and there's a bridge,
trying to fly under.
Go under that bridge, man. Every time. Or if there are kind of slats in the bridge. You know, it's kind of like a suspension bridge. Go fucking sideways through that shit, man. Every time. There are no points. I'm not being rewarded for this. It's just complete compulsion. Like, it just innate is built into my genetics that I have to go sideways and go through the.
Which one? What kind of primordial ancestors memory you're tapping into there?
There's a guy running away from a lion, and there's like a really narrow slat, and he has to dive sideways. He's got to angle himself.
The Battlefield games used to be great for that stuff. And I feel like they've lost a little bit of that since Battlefield 3.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a kind of heavier duty military sort of shooter now. There's a little bit of the kind of physics slapstick fun that it had in 1942. And
I don't know, you still see it in videos of people kind of ejecting out of planes and hijacking somebody else's plane and stuff like that.
Flying a rocket in midair and then landing back in their own plane.
But the stuff that I can't do. And I could do it, kind of, some of those things in the original Battlefield.
It's gone in 4, weirdly. Like in 3, there's these great little drones that you could use to fly them up, and they'll recon everyone, pilot them on the enemy's map. But people discovered early on that you could just stand on them and then have your mate fly you upwards. And so they'd have these like drone soldiers who are just like in the clouds firing down on people with sniper rifles and stuff.
Oh, so Tom Francis posted a screenshot. I don't know if it's his screenshot of in Far Cry 4. Of an elephant on a dinghy. So clearly elephants can stand on nearly any physics object without trouble, and I'm wondering now if it's worth booting that up and seeing where else I can put elephants in that game.
There's the GIF that was going around last week as well of the guy setting off an explosion behind a bear to kill it at the exact moment as an eagle attacked him, and so the exploding dang bear flew through the air and just hits the eagle. It's just attached to his arm and just kills it. And so that means that ragdolling physics
kills things.
Creatures still interact with living physics creatures in a way that their mass causes damage, which is
I was thought the eagle would have been immune while it's in that attack animation. But I guess actually Far Cry 4 probably has to do a lot more of that. It can't get away with doing that stuff smoke and mirrors, because there's a chance that you'll have a co-op player observing it from third person at any point. And of course, you need to make those things interactive then. If it had been a single player game, you'd probably, you can't attack the eagle when it's in that, so they probably wouldn't even think about making it like they probably wouldn't even put a hitbox on it, because your entire model is engaged in this animation cycle that can't be broken. But,
there's a lot of the first-person animations that do look fucking weird, though, when viewed from the third-person co-op. Especially some of the kind of
wingsuit stuff.
The wingsuit stuff's great because you move so slowly. But also the knife takedowns, like there's certain kind of stealthy lunging takedowns where you sort of, in the first person, it looks like you lean forward, grab a guy around the throat from behind and kind of pull him towards you and just kind of like pull him quite quickly as if you're not that far away. But in third person, you see that he sort of raises off the ground as you pull him. So it looks like you reach around his neck and with one hand from the shoulder just kind of like lift him up like he has no weight.
It looks really weird when you pick up bodies and stuff like that. It looks very strange. I know that they probably planned it to be a single-player game, and the art director probably had some kind of nervous breakdown when they said that all this stuff. What? It's like, but it's going to look shit. And then somebody rightfully said, nobody will care. It's going to be so much fun.
This is very true.
So I know if I'd been in that art director's shoes, I probably would have had a tantrum and quit.
Ed writes, Dear Crate and Owlbear, Chris has mentioned the Numenera campaign he's been running a couple of times in previous podcasts. Having just started running a D&D 5th edition campaign for some of the forumites, I wanted to ask, what have you taken from your video game experiences to utilise in your GMing and story writing? Any tips? Also, would you care to regale us with some tales of your players' exploits? Thanks for reading, everybody. Ed. Well, Chris isn't here.
But you've played...
I've just some D&D. I've done loads of RPGs, really. I've not DM'd very much, though. The DMing is a great way to get into writing fiction, I think. Like, you've got to build worlds and make them logically consistent, and then react to them in a way that, forces creative thought. I'm not sure about, was he talking about designing games specifically, or about...
No, just like, what have you taken from your video game experiences to utilise in your GMing and story writing?
Nothing. I wrote an entire article about how, like playing D&D taught me that RPGs are shit because they don't allow for the kind of creativity that really makes pen and paper RPGs amazing. The kind of reactive, like we talk about call and response. The call and response is so heavily mediated by, an impassive system that doesn't care you're there. It's like, what's it called?
It's a lot like Chris.
Is it resistentialism? The kind of, the comedy, theory that says objects are... Oh no, sorry, it's existentialism says objects are indifferent, everything's indifferent to you. That's what the game system is. Like, really, it's just kind of, you're slotting into its cogs and you're going to be spat out the other end. But in a kind of narrative sense, that's not good enough. So you're forced into these binary, progression trees. Whereas the amazing thing about interacting with the GM is that it's just you're matching your wit with theirs and trying to come up with something fucking cool in a way that's both adversarial but mostly collaborative. And it's such a strange and brilliant cauldron for creative minds to come up with cool ideas and bounce off each other and entertain each other. And video games will never do that. It's just impossible.
I did really like Sleep is Death for that. And it's a video game, but it is just riffing purely on that Dungeon Master, or Game Master rather, experience, where one person creates a kind of rough story and a set of sprites, and then a second player connects to that game as an online server, and they both have 60 seconds to take turns where they can, the player can move or say things or type interactions, and then the GM has to respond to whatever it is they've said by maybe quickly drawing a sprite in order to allow it to happen, or having one of the NPC characters say something in return. And you had that kind of adversarial storytelling where sometimes you could kind of go along with what the GM wanted you to do, and you could kind of see that, and that could be kind of cool if they were a good writer, but a lot of the time the fun came from just making them adapt to the silly shit that you were saying. It had this kind of madcap screwball comedy sort of feel to it.
I really liked it. I liked that it was so honest with its attempt to interpret the kind of DM-player relationship. I don't think it was successful. But the thing I really enjoyed about it most was that it saves, because every scene is basically like a still scene, and then the player makes decisions, and then the GM has to build another still scene, and then update, refresh the page, basically. But then the game saves those stills into a story, basically, that you can watch back almost like a GIF. And those were amazing. Like, you got to watch those adversarial, kind of competitive, but, mutual entertainment skits play out. And there's enormous amounts of... It's so funny. It's so funny watching that battle happen. And that's the closest games have come to it, though it's not close enough. It never will be, I think. It's just a thing games can't do.
Yeah, I think games can learn a lot from D&D in terms of setting difficulty. I think that's I think difficulty is often presented in games as being ways to thwart the player, and actually you're both the game designer and the player are in tandem trying to create an entertaining experience for the player. And actually the more times you the aim of the game isn't just to be rawly difficult, it's to create a sense of tension and drama, really. And that's what people get out of it, I think.
So, the great expression, fail forwards, where people fail into a more interesting scenario, and that's like great DMs will do that. I mean, we'll probably get loads of comments from like really die-hard D&D fans who love the combat, and they think the combat should be like a permadeath punishing. That's a way of playing it, but I personally don't love that as much as...
Yeah. I mean, this is what I thought about Alien Isolation, is that although I really respect it as a game, my ideal Alien experience in terms of recreating the feeling of those films would be in mortal terror continuously and yet always escape. And that's almost an impossible ask for a game. But actually that should be what more games in general of that kind of narrative cinematic ilk should be driving towards, rather than just resetting the player back to a checkpoint and make you do the same thing again. Because at that point, any kind of narrative or drama has evaporated, usually, I think.
I'm sort of surprised, though, that there aren't more games that, like Alien Isolation, brag about having or use an AI director. Like, it seemed like that was such a powerful thing in Left 4 Dead of looking at the 4 players. I think it's probably easier in co-op when you can kind of kill off one person, but the game still continues because there's 3 other people, and then you save the other survivor because they're going to close it somewhere. But having a system which is looking constantly at your health or what's happened recently and maintaining that tension or giving you a little break and that sort of stuff, I'm surprised that there aren't more single player games that do it. Like, other than Alien Isolation, I'm surprised there's not. Rich Stanton,
I know him.
writing on the Twitter threads, he writes to say, "Why will Heroes of the Storm rule the world?"
But this is a bit of a leading question. Some respect.
I think he's playing it at the moment and
wow.
enjoying it.
I think the reason is it's just so much better than Dota. I think that's the reason is
Chris is going to burst in a second.
Pisses all over Dota, the child's game, and Heroes of the Storm is obviously a game for real adults and real people rather than children.
This is going to be brilliant. It's going to be such a mail. Chris is going to kill you, Marsh. You're living with him, man.
I haven't played Heroes of the Storm.
No.
Have you?
I've not played it yet. I'm in the beta. I need to do it properly.
I have also not played it.
Informed opinions all round, but it's
No,
definitely still better than Dota 2.
We can all agree.
A child's game.
It's got a stupid name as well.
Where does LoL rank in your arbitrary assessment of
Also better than Dota, really.
Yeah, no, let's just say that. It's probably better than
I'm just trying to alienate as many people as possible with this, really.
Destro 7000 writes, "In what ways is programming similar to cooking?"
Not really at all, as far as I know, in that I really like cooking, and I don't ever want to do programming, ever.
Why don't you ever want to do program?
It's just... Well, for one thing, I don't want to learn another thing that I'm bad at already. You know, I'm bad at enough things that I'm almost good at, that I should really concentrate on those.
Well, I mean, that's, I guess, a fair thing. But that does also mean, surely, that you're never going to learn anything new ever again for the rest of your life.
Yeah, but I think I have a natural propensity towards learning some things, whereas programming, I have a natural propensity to avoid at all costs.
You're good at language, though. Programming is just language. It's syntax.
It involves a lot of maths and algebraic thinking.
Depends what kind of programming you're doing. You could make games in Game Maker while doing very little maths.
I'm going to watch all Tom's things, obviously, at some point, and make a concerted effort. But I think I'd rather get somebody else to do that stuff for me while I draw goblins. Well, I was going to say, the reason that it's completely different from cooking is that cooking is naturally an art that you wish to reproduce time and again, whereas the end result of programming is hopefully something unique. Otherwise, you've just created another fucking shmup. You know? And who wants to do that apart from every motherfucker apparently out there? Yeah.
We've seen the IGF flats, which are full of many identical games.
Yeah. So, I'm quite happy to cook. I'm quite happy to cook the same delicious pork tenderloin meal as I did for Rich Stanton, in fact, on Friday night, again and again.
Yeah.
But I probably don't want to program the same shmup over and over again.
I guess they're both things that you pretend you do for other people's sake, but which secretly you enjoy probably more than they will.
Yes. Yeah, no, I enjoy cooking.
I think people who program, enjoy programming, and probably enjoy the game that they're making, and enjoy those two things in tandem more than they're not really making it for you. They're doing it for themselves. I feel that way about cooking.
The thing is, you can kind of shuffle your way through cooking, kind of improvising and trying things, and not entirely fucking everything up for yourself forever and killing yourself with poison. The worst, if you burn something tragically, then whatever, just make a sandwich. But with programming, there's there's no way of doing that.
You can't just look in the cupboard and say, "Well, I've got some square brackets and a tilde. Let's make something."
I like to learn by exploring things like drawing and music and stuff, that you can just poke it and then learn when it's bad and then do it differently and then it becomes good eventually. Whereas with programming, it's like, I tried doing this, so it's like, fuck you, no. Over and over and over and over again. And then I'll learn what it wants, the syntax it wants, and then I'll be like, okay, good, I've got that thing. And then, with enough complexity, it'll suddenly just fuck up for no discernible reason. And it'll just go, fuck you, and I'll be like, no, fuck you, and then stop doing it forever. At that point, the frustration for me is just too great, because there's no way for me to progress. It's always like, there's some arbitrary thing that's gone slightly wrong way, way back. You've got to be perfect all the time.
See, I don't feel like that's true, though, when it comes to Game Maker. Game Maker's so forgiving when it comes to syntax. It will accept 8 different types of syntax for any given line, and it will just go, I don't know what you were trying to do, sure, I'll take a guess. And it's only if, it takes a guess and that doesn't work that it will error. And then that can be certainly frustrating, but That's the one time when you have to turn on your programmer brain or the proper kind of logic brain and follow it through. But a lot of the time, once you understand a few basic principles of how it's structured, you can sort of, don't need to learn that much syntax. You can just muddle your way through, and it kind of goes, oh yeah. I think
what I found is that I've muddled my way through a thing, and then needed to create a new system that has just can't interact with anything else. But then, going back and fixing the shit that you've muddled through is just impossible. It's like, I was so wrong at so many points throughout this process that I can't possibly fix this. This is just over. I've got to start again.
Yeah,
that's not like cooking. It's like, cooking, it's probably fine. At all points, it's probably fine.
And that's all the time for questions we have.
Goodbye. Oh, wait! No, there's more. You can send us questions, if you like, at Crowbar at gmail.com. No, hang on, that's not right, is it? Questions at crowbar.com.
Yeah.
That's right, that's the correct one.
Or on Twitter, at Crowbar.
Yeah.
Lovely.
You can visit our forums.
CrowbarCrowbar.com/forum.
Or you can tweet us individually.
I am at Gonnas, Gonnas.
I'm at PCG Ludo, Ludo.
I'm Matt Marsh Davis, that's Davies.
Thanks for listening.